The bronze stylus scratched against the wax tablet as Critias leaned forward, his weathered hands trembling slightly. Around him in the Athenian symposium, 3 men waited in silence: Socrates, Timaeus, Hermocrates. The oil lamps flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. What Critias was about to reveal would echo through millennia, spawning countless expeditions, scientific debates, and wild theories that would never quite die. My great-grandfather Dropides heard this from Solon himself, Critias began, his voice barely above a whisper. And Solon heard it from the priests of Sais in Egypt. The story he told that evening around 360 BCE would become one of history's most enduring mysteries, a tale of a magnificent island civilization that vanished beneath the waves. A story so vivid, so detailed, that thousands of years later, people would still argue whether it was truth or fiction. This is the story of Atlantis and the obsession it would create across centuries. But first we need to understand who was telling this story. Plato, the Athenian philosopher, wasn't some tabloid journalist inventing sensational stories for profit. He was one of the most respected thinkers of the ancient world, a student of Socrates, teacher of Aristotle. His works formed the foundation of Western philosophy. So when he chose to include this tale in not one but 2 of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, people listened. According to Plato's account, the story originated with Solon, the famous Athenian statesman and poet who lived approximately 3 centuries before Plato. Around 593 BCE, Solon traveled to Egypt, to the ancient city of Sais in the Nile Delta. This city was real, we know that much. It stood near the Mediterranean coast and served as Egypt's capital for a time. The priests there were renowned throughout the ancient world for their learning and their preservation of ancient knowledge. In the temple of Neith, goddess of war and hunting, Egyptian priests told Solon an extraordinary story. They claimed that 9,000 years before his visit, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, there existed an island larger than Libya and Asia combined. On this island flourished a mighty kingdom that had extended its influence across vast territories, from Egypt to the northwestern reaches of the Apennine Peninsula in Europe. The priests recounted how this island came to be ruled by its divine lineage. The sea god Poseidon, in typical fashion for Greek deities, had taken a mortal woman named Cleito as his lover. She lived on the island with her parents, and from their union came 5 pairs of twin boys. Poseidon divided the island into 10 portions, giving 1 to each son. The eldest, Atlas or Atlon, became the supreme ruler. From his name came Atlantis, the island itself. The people became known as Atlanteans, and the surrounding ocean became the Atlantic. This divine origin story established a dynasty that would pass power through generations, always to the eldest male heir. But what made Plato's account so compelling wasn't just the mythology. It was the extraordinary level of detail he provided about the island's geography, architecture, and society. Poseidon had fortified the central hill where Cleito's parents had lived, surrounding it with alternating rings of land and water. 2 rings of land, 3 rings of water, each precisely engineered. This made the heart of the island virtually impregnable. The central island, approximately 900 meters in diameter, became the seat of royal power. The island itself possessed everything necessary for prosperity. Dense forests provided timber. Fertile plains yielded abundant crops. Clear springs offered fresh water. But Plato mentions something particularly intriguing: a mysterious metal called orichalcum, second in value only to gold. Modern scholars have cautiously suggested this might have been brass or some copper alloy, but the exact composition remains unknown. The very uncertainty adds to the mystery. The fauna of Atlantis included numerous animals, but Plato specifically mentioned elephants. This detail is puzzling since elephants historically lived only in Africa and Southeast Asia. Why would Plato invent such a specific, verifiable detail if he were simply creating fiction? This question would haunt researchers for millennia. The Atlanteans, blessed with such natural wealth, became master builders and engineers. They constructed magnificent temples and palaces. They carved elaborate canal systems for irrigation and transportation, connecting the concentric rings of water to the sea and to each other. The engineering alone suggested a civilization of remarkable sophistication. At the heart of their capital stood two structures of breathtaking grandeur: the royal palace and the temple of Poseidon. To understand the scale Plato described, consider this. The temple measured 180 meters in length and 90 meters in width. For comparison, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, measured only 115 meters long and 55 meters wide. The Temple of Poseidon, according to Plato, was clad entirely in silver on the outside. Its ceiling was made of ivory. The walls and floors were inlaid with that mysterious orichalcum, which apparently glowed with a reddish light. Inside stood hundreds of statues, but dominating them all was a massive golden statue of Poseidon himself, riding a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses, surrounded by 100 sea nymphs, the Nereids. This wasn't subtle. This was wealth displayed without restraint, power made manifest in precious metals and impossible scale. If someone were inventing a fantasy, why make it so ostentatiously wealthy? The detail suggests either remarkable imagination or something drawn from real observations. Beyond Poseidon, the Atlanteans practiced another important cult, the worship of bulls. During significant ceremonies, they sacrificed these animals. This detail, seemingly minor, would later prove important in connecting Atlantis to other ancient civilizations. The island's landscape was varied and carefully described. A vast central plain covered approximately 200,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of modern Belarus. Mountains surrounded this plain, rising steeply before plunging into the sea. Again, Plato provides specifics when a general description would suffice for a fictional tale. Why? The military might of Atlantis was formidable. The royal portion alone could field 60,000 warriors. The other 9 portions, ruled by the younger branches of the dynasty, contributed additional forces. Plato mentions a fleet of 1,200 ships, a number that strains credibility for the time period he describes, yet he states it as fact. Here we encounter a serious chronological problem. Plato places Atlantis around 9600 BCE, roughly 11,000 years before his own time. But according to conventional archaeology, humans were just entering the Stone Age then. They used stone tools and primitive rafts. The idea of a sophisticated civilization with massive fleets and advanced architecture contradicts everything we know about human development in that period. Yet Plato continues with his political description. Each of the 10 kings ruled as absolute monarch over his portion of the island. They governed according to ancient laws inscribed in the Temple of Poseidon on a pillar made of that precious orichalcum. Every 5 or 6 years, the kings gathered in council to discuss common concerns and resolve disputes. The law forbade them from warring against each other. The descendants of Atlas held primacy in military matters. A death sentence against any royal family member required majority approval from the council. This was essentially a confederation bound by kinship, with clear constitutional principles. Again, remarkable detail for a supposedly fictional account. For generations, perhaps centuries, the Atlanteans lived in peace and prosperity. But gradually, inevitably, wealth corrupted them. The divine blood that flowed in the royal line became diluted over generations. Human nature asserted itself. The Atlanteans began looking beyond their shores with covetous eyes. They launched campaigns of conquest, subjugating neighboring peoples and tribes. Their military machine seemed unstoppable, rolling over opposition with ease. Victory followed victory until they encountered one people who refused to submit, the Athenians. In a desperate struggle, the ancestors of the Greeks, vastly outnumbered and outmatched, somehow managed to halt the Atlantean advance. They paid a terrible price in blood, but they stopped the invasion. This victory would prove Pyrrhic, however, for both civilizations. Zeus, the king of the gods, had been watching. The Atlanteans' greed and aggression had not gone unnoticed in Olympus. Zeus decided to punish them for their hubris and avarice. In a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods, Atlantis sank beneath the waves. The entire civilization vanished. Left behind were only treacherous shoals and muddy shallows that made navigation dangerous for years afterward. Ironically, the virtuous Athenians who had defeated the Atlanteans also perished in this cataclysm, swept away by the same forces that destroyed their enemies. This parallel destruction suggests Plato might have been making a point about the indiscriminate nature of divine justice or natural catastrophe. And there, frustratingly, Plato's second dialogue, Critias, breaks off mid-sentence. We'll never know if he intended to end it there for dramatic effect, if circumstances like death prevented completion, or if the remaining pages simply vanished over the centuries. The abrupt ending only adds to the mystery. So let's examine what we actually know versus what Plato claimed. Was Solon real? Absolutely. He was one of the 7 sages of Greece, a warrior, poet, and reformer who left an indelible mark on Athenian history. Around 593 BCE, he did indeed leave Athens for a decade of travel, and Egypt was among his destinations. Did the city of Sais exist? Yes, it stood in the Nile Delta, not far from the Mediterranean coast. It served as Egypt's capital during certain periods. Ancient sources confirm that its priests were extraordinarily learned. Some Greek scholars even speculated that Athenians might have founded the city before the Great Flood, in prehistoric times. So, theoretically, ancient knowledge could have been preserved there. But here's where Plato's story becomes suspicious. He traces the tale through a chain of oral transmission. Solon told his great-grandfather Dropides, who told his son, who at age 90 told his grandson Critias. When you calculate the dates, each generation would have needed to father children quite late in life, around 30 to 40 years old, which was unusual for ancient Greeks. This suggests Plato was constructing his timeline carefully, perhaps too carefully. More damning is the complete absence of corroboration. No other ancient Greek writer, not Plato's predecessors nor his contemporaries, ever mentioned Atlantis before his dialogues. Herodotus, called the father of history, who wrote extensively about the known world. Not a word about Atlantis. The Egyptians themselves left no records of this story, despite their meticulous documentation of their history. The Theopompus of Chios, a historian who lived shortly after Plato, openly called him a liar and plagiarist. He even wrote a parody of Critias, mocking the story of the mythical island. More significantly, Aristotle, Plato's own student and one of history's greatest minds, never mentioned Atlantis in his comprehensive works about the world and cosmos. Aristotle did once note that the sea beyond the Pillars of Hercules was shallow and muddy, making it difficult to navigate, which obliquely confirms one detail from his teacher's story. But that's it. There's a legend that when asked about Atlantis's reality, Aristotle replied, "Plato is dear to me, but truth is dearer." The quote's authenticity is doubtful, but it captures the skepticism that existed even in ancient times. Later Roman historians like Pliny and Strabo mentioned Atlantis only in passing, always citing Plato as their source. Plutarch retold the story in his biography of Solon, adding details like Solon's supposed desire to write an epic poem about Atlantis. But these additions were likely literary embellishments rather than historical facts. Ancient philosophers either accepted Plato's account uncritically, like Proclus Diadochus 8 centuries later, or ignored it entirely. The ancient world possessed no additional evidence, written or physical, supporting Atlantis's existence. This led to an interpretation that persists today. Plato created a political allegory. He wanted to contrast 2 types of government. On one side, free and democratic Athens. On the other, Atlantis corrupted by power and wealth. For his contemporary readers, Atlantis would have resembled their greatest enemy, Persia. Plato structured his discussion as a dialogue between 4 historical figures, Socrates, Timaeus, Critias, and Hermocrates. The problem? These men could never have actually met in real life. Their lifespans didn't overlap properly. Plato was constructing a philosophical thought experiment, but here's what makes the story so enduring. Plato might have built his fiction on fragments of truth, like a modern science fiction writer. In his time, people were beginning to understand that the ocean wasn't just divine chaos, but a vast water territory that could contain any geographical features. The concentric ring design of Atlantis's capital and its agricultural systems appear in real ancient engineering treatises. The Atlanteans' lifestyle could have been borrowed from real peoples and cultures. In this sense, Plato might be considered a father of science fiction. His genius lay in creating a story so convincing that people would debate its truth for millennia. The level of detail, the connections to real civilizations, all combined to make Atlantis feel possible, even probable. After the Greco-Roman period ended, Atlantis disappeared from historical discussion for roughly 1,000 years. Plato's work survived, but during the Middle Ages, Christian scholars read them primarily as examples of ancient philosophy. The Atlantis story seemed irrelevant. Everything changed at the dawn of the Age of Exploration. In 1484, Italian scholar Marsilio Ficino translated and published Plato's complete works, reigniting interest in Atlantis. Ficino accepted Plato's account, but concluded that mapping the island was impossible given current knowledge. Then came 1492. Christopher Columbus sailed west, seeking a route to India, and instead found the Americas. This discovery transformed the Atlantis debate. French historian Pierre Vidal-Naquet noted that at this moment, the Atlantis train gathered steam, pulled out of the station, and has never stopped since. Plato had written in Timaeus, "From Atlantis, travelers could easily reach other islands, and from those islands to the opposite continent." Suddenly, these words seemed prophetic. The ancient Greeks had known about a massive continent beyond the ocean. The Atlanteans could have reached it. Almost immediately after Columbus's discovery, people began comparing America to Atlantis. The most famous comparison involved the Aztec civilization in Mexico, which Hernán Cortés conquered in 1521. The Aztecs possessed remarkable sophistication, advanced engineering and construction, pictographic writing, irrigation systems, complex political structures, and an elaborate religion with numerous gods. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, seemed to mirror Plato's description of Atlantis. Built on an island, surrounded by numerous canals that served both defensive and transportation purposes, it astonished the Spanish conquistadors. The pyramids functioning as temples resembled similar structures in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Could the same people have built all these pyramids? Supporting this theory was the Aztec myth of Quetzalcoatl, a semi-divine being described as white-skinned, blue-eyed, and blonde, who arrived by boat from the east and taught the Aztecs everything they knew. Could this have been a surviving Atlantean? Unfortunately, the Spanish completely destroyed Tenochtitlan and burned most Aztec written records. Our knowledge of Aztec culture comes largely from the conquistadors themselves, whose accounts might have been exaggerated. 30 years after the Aztec Empire fell, Spanish priest Francisco López de Gómara noticed that the Nahuatl word for water was atl. He also observed that the Atlantic coast of America matched Plato's geographical descriptions. Later enthusiasts connected Atlantis to Aztlan, the legendary homeland of the Aztecs, meaning place of herons or white place. The Aztecs' own legends suggested they fled their homeland due to either flooding or tyrannical rule. Modern researchers believe Aztlan was probably located within Mexico itself, but the theory remains appealing to Atlantis seekers. Legends of a great flood that covered the earth exist in cultures worldwide, from China to the Americas. Over 250 such stories have been documented. The most famous is the biblical flood, but the common element across all cultures is the same. Gods punished humanity for various transgressions. Atlantis's destruction follows this exact pattern. If Atlanteans somehow reached America and influenced the Aztecs, why didn't they affect other indigenous cultures? Believers argue they did. Some Mesoamerican stelae show carvings that vaguely resemble elephants. Since elephants never lived in the Americas, someone must have told the indigenous people about them. Visitors from another continent, perhaps Atlanteans, who had elephants according to Plato. Some enthusiasts moved Atlantis to South America, to the Altiplano Plateau in the Andes where the Inca civilization flourished. They claimed this plateau's size and location precisely matched Plato's description. How Plato knew about the Andes goes unexplained. The plateau has a rectangular shape, is surrounded by mountains, and has a hill at its center. The Incas, like the Aztecs, built sophisticated structures and pyramids. The theory even found an explanation for the cataclysm, a mountain lake's water level rising catastrophically due to earthquakes. Around the same time as Gomara's book, another work appeared, a discourse of Sir Humphrey Gilbert, to prove a northwest passage to China and India. Gilbert argued that America was Atlantis, and if Atlantis was an island, there must be a northern strait, similar to the one Magellan found in the south. Gilbert never found his passage. He died in a shipwreck near the Azores. The famous French philosopher Michel de Montaigne quoted Plato's account in his celebrated essays. Montaigne accepted some facts, but refused to believe Atlantis and America were the same place. A new direction came from 15th-century botanist Olaus Rudbeck, who published a work titled simply Atlantis. He relocated it to his homeland, Sweden. Rudbeck claimed that using the Eddas, Norse mythological texts, he'd found Atlantis's capital ruins near the ancient city of Uppsala. The ancient Goths, meaning Swedes, were the Atlanteans who conquered Europe in prehistoric times. Rudbeck didn't stop there. He concluded that Sweden was humanity's cradle, giving the world all major cultural and technical achievements. Remarkably, supporters of this theory existed even into the 20th century. Another significant figure was Athanasius Kircher, a renowned German polymath who studied everything from physics to Egyptology. By his birth, scholars had been studying Atlantis for 2,000 years. Yet Kircher became the first to publish a map of the massive island in 1664. Where did he get it? According to Kircher, the map was preserved in the Vatican archives, the only surviving copy from the ancient world. Kircher suggested that the Azores or Canary Islands might be Atlantis's remnants. He believed the Canary Islands' indigenous people, the Guanche, who were light-skinned and blonde, descended from the Atlanteans. We'll return to these theories shortly. Kircher's claims deserve skepticism, if only because his other works include calculations of Noah's Ark's dimensions and proof that if the Tower of Babel had been completed, it would have flipped the earth over. Italian Count Giovanni Rinaldo Carli developed Kircher's theory further. He believed Atlantis existed as a large island or continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and truly sank because Earth collided with a comet, changing Earth's orbit and causing floods and earthquakes. As evidence, Carli pointed to fossils of prehistoric marine animals found on land, supposedly proving such events were common in Earth's history. Voltaire, that committed materialist, reportedly laughed when told these theories and kept asking the same fair question: why has no one found clear evidence of such a powerful civilization as the Atlanteans except for unrestrained fanatics? Russian researchers also engaged with Atlantis. In 1854, Russian scientist, traveler, and Minister of National Education Avraham Norov wrote research on Atlantis. After studying numerous sources, he firmly determined the island's location. Atlantis, according to our assumption, occupied the entire space of the Mediterranean Sea from Cyprus to Sicily. Interestingly, he'd correctly identified the location of an object whose fate likely inspired Plato. But what incredible cataclysm could flood such a gigantic island? In 1996, American geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman formulated a theory. Melting glaciers caused catastrophic sea level rise. This flooded a massive territory of 155,000 square kilometers. At the Bosphorus Strait, a powerful waterfall formed, pouring water from the Mediterranean Sea into a freshwater lake that became the Black Sea. This became the basis for flood myths that forever changed coastal geography. According to the authors, Atlantis's lowland portion was flooded, while the mountainous part remained as the islands of Sardinia and Corsica. The Black Sea flood hypothesis faced criticism, but substantial sea level rise over the past 7,000 to 8,000 years is established fact. Now we approach a pivotal moment in the search for Atlantis. an obscure American politician and writer, collected all known theories about Atlantis into one work. His name was Ignatius Loyola Donnelly, founder of a new field known today as Atlantology. Ignatius, descendant of Irish immigrants, was named after the founder of the Jesuit order. In 1882, Donnelly ended his political career and published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. The book immediately became a worldwide bestseller. Donnelly argued that Plato's writing style and factual material indicated not fiction, but genuine history. He wrote, "This is the true story of a people ruled by mighty kings." What were Donnelly's main theses beyond Plato's account? Atlantis was the cradle of ancient civilizations and the original source of knowledge about construction, engineering, writing, medicine, and astronomy. The gods of ancient peoples were Atlantis's rulers and heroes, and myths about them were confused memories of real events distorted over centuries. Egyptian and Incan mythology preserved Atlantis's original religion, sun worship. Flood myths across different cultures were memories of the cradle's destruction, Atlantis itself. Ancient Egypt was the oldest civilization closest in time to the Atlanteans. Finally, some Atlanteans truly escaped and spread their achievements across Europe and America. Where did Donnelly place the island? He completely agreed with Plato that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the open ocean. He supported Kircher's version locating it near the Azores. He concluded the island, or rather an elongated continent, mostly sank due to changes in Earth's crust between 9000 and 8000 BCE. Donnelly also considered other destruction scenarios, such as a meteorite. As evidence, he cited numerous facts. In 1974, the research vessel Academic Petrovsky from Moscow State University surveyed the underwater mountain Ampere, located in the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 470 kilometers west of Morocco, at 80 meters depth. Researchers supposedly found evidence of an ancient civilization destroyed by catastrophe and submerged. Photographs showed what appeared to be wall remains and staircases. This caused a sensation until it was revealed that the mountain's relief had natural origins. Today's knowledge of geology and seismology allows us to determine one thing precisely. The material forming continents and continental shelves differs from rock composing the ocean floor. Numerous studies simply exclude the existence of a sunken island or continent in the middle of any ocean, not just the Atlantic. As one scientist said during an Atlantis debate, even if we invoke extraterrestrial forces to explain how a large island was destroyed in a cataclysm, it wouldn't help. A geologist could identify its remains. We agreed at the beginning not to discuss outright fantasy, but we must mention one such story, Lemuria, a fictional continent supposedly located in the Indian Ocean that sank in a cataclysm. The strange name came from lemurs. In the 1860s, proponents noticed lemurs lived not only in Madagascar, but also in southern India, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asian islands. They concluded a continent once connected these lemur habitats. Science quickly disproved this hypothesis, but occultists became involved. They grew popular in intellectual circles at the turn of the 20th century. The theory found an unexpected defender in famous mystic Helena Blavatsky. In 1888, she published her major work, The Secret Doctrine, supposedly based on a copy of an ancient secret book from Tibet. Blavatsky convinced followers that the book's original was written in Atlantis. According to her theory, humanity's evolutionary path passes through 7 root races, with humans being the 5th. Our direct ancestors, the Lemurians, were the 3rd race. They looked like ape-like humanoids, were hermaphrodites, and laid eggs. Some had 2 pairs of arms and a 3rd eye on the back of their heads. We won't continue with this. It belongs more to clinical psychiatry than history. But let's briefly cover recent Atlantis-related events. Recently, the legendary island has been sought in the Caribbean Sea, off the coast of Bimini, one of the Bahama Islands. Hundreds of square and rectangular stone slabs were discovered in the 1960s, along with paved roads and structures. In the same area off Cuba's coast, at 700 meters depth, underwater pyramids and a sphinx were found. According to some researchers, they were built 10,000 years ago. This very year, Off the coast of Cadiz in southern Spain, mysterious submerged structures were discovered, walls over 6 meters high surrounding rectangular ruins. Their description supposedly corresponds to Poseidon's temple from Plato's accounts. As we see, the Atlantis legend remains surprisingly popular today. I'm certain it will continue fascinating minds for years, despite modern science methodically debunking one theory after another. Over hundreds of years, the world has seen thousands of books, articles, lectures, and films devoted to this topic. Today, the geography of Atlantis's possible location stretches from India to Bolivia. The Mediterranean version involving Santorini's volcanic eruption is considered closest in chronology and details, but the general scientific consensus hasn't changed. Atlantis didn't exist. It was simply a beautiful fantasy by an ancient Greek scholar. But the story he wrote 2,400 years ago is so natural, so vivid and attractive, that people eager to explore it will continue appearing for a long time. As a philosopher friend of mine would say, who are we to disbelieve old Plato? On the other hand, Atlantis certainly didn't exist, yet pyramids in different parts of the world resemble each other, and flood legends across different parts of the world are identical. Coincidence? You decide for yourselves. Dear friends, thank you for watching this historical exploration. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. We have many episodes available, and we're preparing an extensive September lineup with many fascinating stories. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this journey through one of history's greatest mysteries. Leave a comment below telling us what you think. Did Atlantis exist, or was it pure fiction? And don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves unsolved historical mysteries. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep learning from history. The truth is, despite Donnelly's passionate arguments, there's no direct mention of pyramids in Plato's original text. Moreover, the architecture and purposes of these structures in the Old World and New World differ significantly. So these and many other pieces of evidence from the American writer are easily refuted. Nevertheless, Donnelly's book went through 50 editions, and it provided a powerful impetus for Atlantis research for years to come. During the same period, while Ignatius was preparing his book, another of our heroes, Heinrich Schliemann, was conducting excavations at the Turkish hill of Hisarlik. After many years, as you know from our episode about him available on the channel, he found Homer's Troy there. Among sensation seekers, a hypothesis immediately appeared. This was Plato's Atlantis. According to this new version, the battles between the inhabitants of Athens and the Atlanteans were that very Trojan War from Homer's Iliad. The geographical location, the city's architecture, everything seemed similar to the Atlantean capital. Moreover, Turkey has always been distinguished by seismic activity. Indeed, there could have been a destructive earthquake there. But the main historical sensation shook the world at the beginning of the new century. In 1900, English archaeologist Arthur Evans conducted excavations on Crete and discovered the Minoan civilization, which existed from the 20th to the 15th century BCE, a powerful maritime state with highly developed agriculture, crafts, and trade. The Minoans were excellent builders. The main proof of this fact remains the famous palace of Knossos with its labyrinth. The Minoans had a strong army, with which they established numerous colonies on nearby islands and even on the mainland in Greece. They were excellent sailors and probably could reach the northern coast of the Black Sea. However, around 1610 BCE, on the island of Thera, located 120 kilometers away, an incredible eruption of the Santorini volcano occurred. In power, it equaled the explosion of approximately 200,000 atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima. Remnants of ash from this eruption were later found not only on Crete, but also in Egypt and Asia Minor. Additionally, the monstrous explosion caused a powerful tsunami, which became another, but this time completely real prototype of the Great Flood. The cataclysm dealt a severe blow to the Minoan state. If it didn't completely destroy it, as some scholars believe, it certainly negatively affected its further fate. And here, it seems, a real candidate for the true Atlantis was found. Let's compare. Both states were colonial powers with strong fleets and strong armies. The Minoans, like the Atlanteans, fought with the Greeks and lost. Moreover, the location of palace complexes on Crete suggests that the state was a confederation of kingdoms just like Atlantis. On Crete, the cult of the bull was widespread. Let's remember the legendary mythical Minotaur. This is also a reference to the Atlanteans. And finally, both states suffered from the same natural cataclysm. Everything seems to fit, but there's an important but. The ancient Greeks were well acquainted with Minoan civilization, which existed significantly later than the period indicated by Plato. There are archaeological finds that confirm life on Crete even after the volcanic eruption, which contradicts the thesis about the complete flooding of the island. Then what sense would Plato have in transforming the real history of Crete into a fantastic fable about Atlantis? Questions and doubts remained, but the Atlantologists wouldn't calm down. None of them wanted to miss such weighty confirmations of their theory. If Crete doesn't fit, let's turn to that very island of Thera where the volcano is located. As a result of the explosion, a huge caldera formed 14 kilometers in diameter. It was filled with water, and one large island turned into several small ones, which today we know as the tourist pearl of Santorini. In 1967, an ancient Minoan settlement was discovered on Thera. Akrotiri, like Pompeii, was buried under a thick layer of ash and very well preserved. But during excavations, scientists didn't find a single body, not a single trace of people. This means the eruption wasn't sudden. The population managed to leave the island. This contradicts the main dramatic episode from Plato's story that the inhabitants of Atlantis perished instantly. This story interested another outstanding traveler, Jacques-Yves Cousteau. He and his team set off for the Greek islands to find Atlantis. For a year, Cousteau explored the sea depths off the coasts of Thera and other islands, searching for the sunken city. Off the coast of the island of Dia, he managed to find a sunken Minoan port with fortifications built from gigantic stone blocks. No evidence of the myth's reality could be found, although the press actively covered this expedition. This again fueled interest in Atlantis. In 1927, here's yet another version. British philosopher and Plato scholar Alfred Edward Taylor proposed this hypothesis. In the story of Atlantis, Plato used facts from the history of the real city of Helike. The city was located in the Gulf of Corinth in western Greece. It was a rich, prosperous metropolis that headed the first Achaean League of 12 city-states. The temple and sanctuary of Heliconian Poseidon was known throughout classical Greece. In terms of popularity, only the Delphic oracle could rival it. Helike was destroyed by an earthquake and a 10-meter tsunami around 373 BCE. What does this mean? This was approximately 13 years before Plato wrote Timaeus. And yes, the ancient world attributed the catastrophe to the anger of the sea god. When the surviving inhabitants returned to the once great city the next morning, they found only the treetops from Poseidon's sacred grove sticking out of the water. Over 2,000 years, history erased the memory of the city's location. But unlike Atlantis, the city was found in 2001. Interestingly, Helike was searched for in the Gulf, but was found on land under a multi-meter layer of silt that the sea tide had deposited over time. Perhaps for his story, Plato really did take some real facts from this history. Now let's briefly return to Russian, or more precisely Soviet, admirers of Plato's myth. The main one among them is rightfully the famous scientist and chemist Nikolai Feodosievich Zhirov. In 1964, he published his major work, a book titled Atlantis, Basic Problems of Atlantology. This book still has no equal in its coverage of factual material and is still considered the handbook for those searching for Atlantis. Zhirov was convinced of Atlantis's reality. He examined 9 maritime and 16 continental variants of Atlantis's location. He supported Kircher's theory, which placed the state in the region of the Azores Islands. He believed that the island, or more precisely an elongated continent, mostly sank underwater as a result of changes in the Earth's crust. And this occurred between 9,000 and 8,000 BCE. Additionally, the scientist considered other versions of Atlantis's destruction, such as a meteorite, and as evidence of his theory, he cited numerous facts. In 1974, Moscow State University's research vessel, Academic Petrovsky, conducted surveys of the underwater mountain Ampere, located in the Atlantic Ocean approximately 470 kilometers west of Morocco. At a depth of 80 meters, researchers supposedly found evidence of an ancient civilization that was destroyed by a cataclysm and sank underwater. The photographs identified remains of walls and staircases. This caused a real sensation, but it soon became clear that the mountain's relief had a natural origin. It must be said that today's knowledge of geology and seismology allows us to determine one thing precisely. The material of the Earth's crust that forms continents and the continental shelf differs from the rock composing the ocean floor. And numerous studies simply exclude the existence of a sunken island or even a continent in the middle of any ocean, not just the Atlantic. As one scientist said during a debate about Atlantis, even if we invoke extraterrestrial forces to explain how a large island was destroyed as a result of a cataclysm, it won't help. A geologist would be able to identify its remains. At the very beginning of today's episode, we agreed not to discuss outright fantasy, but we must still remember one such story. We're talking about Lemuria, a fictional continent that supposedly was located in the Indian Ocean and sank, again as a result of a cataclysm. The strange name came from lemurs, the primates. Proponents of this hypothesis in the 1860s noticed that lemurs lived not only in Madagascar, but also in southern India, Sri Lanka, and the islands of Southeast Asia. From this, the conclusion was drawn that once in this region there existed a continent that connected the lemur habitats. From a scientific point of view, this hypothesis was refuted quite quickly, but occultists or conductors of hidden knowledge got involved. They became very popular in intellectual circles at the turn of the 20th century. The theory unexpectedly found another defender in the famous mystic Helena Blavatsky. In 1888, she published her main work, The Secret Doctrine. The work was based on a copy of some ancient secret book from Tibet. Blavatsky convinced her followers that the original of this book was written in Atlantis. According to her theory, humanity's evolutionary path passes through 7 root races, where we humans are the 5th race, and our direct ancestors, the Lemurians, are the 3rd race. They looked like ape-like humanoids, were hermaphrodites, and laid eggs. Some of them had 2 pairs of arms and a 3rd eye on the back of their heads. Well, we probably won't continue further. This belongs more to the realm of clinical psychiatry. Nevertheless, let's briefly go through recent events related to Atlantis at the end of this episode. Recently, the legendary island has been sought in the Caribbean Sea. There, off the coast of Bimini, one of the Bahama Islands, hundreds of square and rectangular stone slabs were discovered in the 1960s, as well as roads and structures paved with them. In the same region off the coast of Cuba, at a depth of 700 meters, underwater pyramids and a sphinx were found. According to Atlantologist scholars, they were built 10,000 years ago. Literally this year, off the coast of Cadiz in southern Spain, submerged mysterious structures were discovered, namely walls over 6 meters high that surround rectangular ruins. Their description supposedly corresponds to Poseidon's temple from Plato's accounts. As we can see, the legend of Atlantis remains surprisingly popular in our day, and I'm confident it will continue to captivate minds for a long time. Despite the fact that modern science methodically debunks one theory after another, over hundreds of years the world has seen thousands of books, articles, lectures, and films devoted to this topic. Today, the geography of Atlantis's possible location stretches from India to Bolivia. The Mediterranean version of the Santorini volcanic eruption is considered the closest in chronology and details, but still the general opinion of scientific specialists hasn't changed. Atlantis didn't exist. It was simply a beautiful fantasy of an ancient Greek scholar. But the story he wrote 2,400 years ago is so natural, so vivid and attractive, that people eager to dig into it will continue appearing in abundance for a long time. And as a philosopher friend of mine would say, who are we to disbelieve old Plato? On the other hand, Atlantis certainly didn't exist, yet pyramids in different parts of the world resemble each other, and the legend of the flood in different parts of the world is identical. Coincidence? Well, you decide for yourselves whether it's coincidence or not. Dear friends, thank you for watching this historical exploration. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. We have many episodes available, and we're preparing a big September lineup with many fascinating stories. Hit that like button if you found this journey through one of history's greatest mysteries compelling. Leave a comment below telling us what you think. Did Atlantis exist, or was it pure fiction? Share your theories about those mysterious pyramids and flood legends. Could there be a connection we haven't discovered yet? And don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves unsolved historical mysteries, ancient civilizations, or simply enjoys questioning what we think we know about the past. Check out our other episodes exploring archaeological discoveries and legendary civilizations. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember that sometimes the greatest mysteries are the ones that teach us the most about ourselves and our endless human fascination with the unknown.